Is Jack Daniels here?
He's at the bar.
Come on, Mary, you should have seen that one.
Jack was going to do a short thing on Mary Lou. As many of you know, Mary Lou, or many of you may or may not know, Mary Lou Robeson did a lot of things in her life, and she passed away earlier this month, February of 2025. And we remember fondly by anyone who raced with the San Francisco region of FCCA, or Vintage Race Club, CSRG, and HMSA. She was active in many capacities at the races as a worker and official for the past 6 decades. Additionally, more personally, she was administrator of the Lunch Bunch for several years in the late 2000s. For those of you that knew her, there will be a celebration of life, moral actually, at the address shown on the slide up there. Moving on. Our presenters today are the duo of Jay Lamb and John Picard. Jay is much more than just a fun guy. He is an accomplished writer, editor, and publisher. He sold his first article, a drive report on Elvis's Maserati E-Blade, to Autoweek when he was 16, and claims to have never had a real job since, and I believe him. Jay was editor of Sports Car International for 5 years, and Vintage Motorsports for 4 years, and then founded Driver's Door Incorporated, which published Corvette magazine, Mazda Sport, and accidentally created 24 Hours of Lemons, a conspicuously low-pressure event that began as a one-off beer league type party for a few of his friends, and is now the largest racing series in the world by the number of drivers. Everybody has a different definition. Jay has written and published 9 books, 8 of them on cars and the other on art. He has had published over 4 magazine articles, and for decades was a regular feature contributor to magazines such as Sports Car International, Car and Driver, Spy, Automobile, and Papa Mechanics. He allows us that there is a bunch of other stuff that he simply can't remember. Jay credits Martin Swade with turning him on to vintage rallying in the 90s when Martin convinced him to join in on the California Historical Motoring Tour and other California Melee-related events. He still frequently does road events for fun with Lunch Bunch regulars such as Dick McClure, John Burton, and Stephen Cavallari as co-drivers. If you believe the tax return he once published in Automobile, Jay considers all these great times as business expenses. And I believe
He's going to jail.
our other speaker, or co-speaker, is John Picard. John has spoken here before, and it's been a lot of fun. John is an automobile historian and professional automotive enthusiast. He bought his first car at age 14, restored cars in his garage to help put himself through college, owned a picture car company called Creative Film Cars in New York City. It's a story in itself. Ran an illegal cross-country cannonball event called the 2904. Another story. Was the marketing director and in-house historian for Bruce Canepa at his amazing facility in Scotts Valley. He wrote and researched 72 cars for the Porsche's historic tent at Rennsport 6, and has been ill-advisedly building and racing cheaty cars in the 24 Hours of Lemons ever since. An accomplished researcher, writer, and storyteller, John's work has appeared in magazines including the 000, which is the strangest name for magazine, Vintage Race Car, Classic Sport, Porsche, and Speed Sport. And his VinWiki car stories have over 1 million views on YouTube. I highly recommend you look that up. He has some great stories there. In any case, please welcome John and Jay.
Oh yeah, where is it?
I got it.
Okay.
All right. So,
All right, I'll set us up. John is the better storyteller, so I'm going to lean on you for a lot of this. But thank you guys for being here. So Gary asked me long ago if I would come and speak, and I said, absolutely not. That sounds like a lot of work, and I don't like to do a lot of work. And he asked me again, and I felt a little churlish. And then my accountant said, no, you should go because that will give some plausibility to this thing that you're doing, car stuff, and it could be tax deductible. So that's why we're here. Thanks, everybody. We're done. Okay, bye. So I talked to John. We've talked about this subject a lot. We've been friends and we worked on cars together and had a lot of projects together for a while now. This is a subject that is close to both of our hearts. And as we kicked it around, it occurred to both of us, this is something more people ought to talk about and think about. And fundamentally, the topic is this. We all know what car racing is. We've been raised within it for car fans. We think we understand what the point of a car race is. And as you get more embroiled in it, me as an organizer, John as somebody who races and deals with race cars and racers constantly at a very high level, you start to realize racing is really none of those things. It is really not at all what you think it is. You want to take on from there?
Well, this is your baby, right? So it's a dog and pony show, so I think I'm the dog and you're the pony, right?
All right.
So I think we'll just throw. This is the first time we've ever done this, and we just
you'd be
it.
surprised.
This is more riffing than we are organization. But one of the things is we kind of broke it down into it's not a competition about who's going fastest, right? So that Jay brought this up, and I thought it was really interesting. No matter what we do at Bonneville or on a racetrack or anything like that, we're never going to beat Apollo 10 at 24,860 miles an hour as fast as a human being's ever gone in existence. So IndyCar can suck it, and so can Bonneville. Now we brought it. We kind of said it's not about technology. It's not about moral fortitude.
Well, what we started with, really, and it is what do people think it is, and what people think racing is a place where you can go and all limits are off, and technology is at the cutting edge, and the most talented, and in some ways the most morally superior figure will rise to the top. When you think racing and you don't think terribly deeply about it, that's what you think it is. It's a place to go as fast as you can. It is none of those things, and in fact, in a lot of ways, it's the opposite. To John's point about Apollo 10, which is nobody's going to go faster than that, and when you look at what are people really trying to accomplish, the organizers are trying to slow racers down. It is not a place to go as fast as you can. It is a place where there are hundreds of random limitations slowing you down from going as fast as you could. It's the exact opposite of what you think.
Yeah. And so it's not about technology, right? So
it's also not about
it's
technology.
not about technology. So we have a couple of slides. One thing is a lot of stuff that people think came from racing actually never came from racing. We have the seatbelt. That came from a glider in 1887, believe it or not. The first seatbelt was built. It wasn't built for a race car. The first monocoque was not a race car. So monocoque came into race cars in the 1960s. You started seeing them replacing the two-frame cars. That actually was a World War I fighter plane. That was the first metal monocoque aircraft ever built. And then turbocharging. We always think about turbocharging. We think about the turbos in the 60s and of course in the 1970s with the Porsche Can-Am cars. But the B-17 bomber in 1938 was turbocharged radials. And turbocharging was actually earlier than that. I found out as I dug into turbocharging a little bit that turbocharging was actually on boats. There was a boat, a turbo diesel engine called, strangely enough, the Zeppelin. It was made by the Germans, but had a giant turbocharged diesel engine that put out about 4,000 horsepower before World War II. So these aren't technologies. This is not from racing. Racing has benefited from the technology, usually from war or from, your argument was,
From cafe.
cafe.
Yeah, and we were just talking at lunch about fuel injection. John was telling a story about a guy right in the neighborhood who has a mechanical fuel injection restoration shop. And a lot of that technology, again, goes back to aircraft, it goes back to World War II. And you were giving the example of a guy, the mechanical fuel pump guy.
Yeah, so if you know Gus at Pacific Fuel Injection, right across the way, right? He's an amazing man. He still works on all the German, he was rebuilding an RSR, and I don't have an RSR pump for me. He took me in the back and he goes, you know where all this comes from? And I'm like, yeah? He's like, let me show you. And he walks over, he's got a poster on the wall of Messerschmitt. He's all, that's where this comes from. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, do you want to see one? And I'm like, yeah. So he goes over on a cart, it looks like a bunch of garbage, but then he pulls out all this stuff, he pulls out, and there's the cam for the fuel injection for a Messerschmitt. And I'm like, that is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. He goes, yes, I found it on eBay. I'm like, well, all right. He goes, I'm just playing with it, it's fun. It was underwater. And I'm like, oh, great. So he shows it to me, so like, he goes, you know what came next? And I'm like, of course. They took that technology and they came out with it in the 300 SLR in the early 50s, and Mercedes started running with the technology they got in World War II into automobiles, and fuel injection took off after that.
Yeah, so it's not, it's really not about the cutting edge of technology. What you get is you get technology as racing gets more and more expensive. People can buy higher and higher technology and they can adapt it to cars, and that's all great. But the idea that racing really improves the breed, I think we would challenge that. I think racing really benefits from these other things happening in the world around it. That's not really what's driving it. And then the third point that we came up with, moral fortitude and upright standing. John, being the historian, give a couple of examples of good moral winning race drivers.
So here's one. This is John Paul Sr. From the famous days of IMSA. He was a murderer, or accused murderer, twice. Smuggler, extortion, drug dealing, and a championship owning car owner and driver. Still, he was accused of killing his wife, and then served some time for some different things, and then was accused of killing, 10 years later, accused of killing his girlfriend, and then he just vanished. So he's still at large, by the way, so be careful. He was known as the pirate, because at one race he actually tried to climb the tower. We disagreed with the results of the race. He climbed the tower like a pirate, because he was going to beat the hell out of the officials at the top of the tower. So that's one of our great leading examples of fine moral fortitude in racing. Followed by, oh, this is the wrong slide. Anyway, that's supposed to be a picture of the Whittington brothers. The Whittington brothers, if anybody knows IMSA, right? International Marijuana Smugglers Association. They were arrested. There we go. That's where it's at. Let's see if this is working. Because there they are. They were arrested for smuggling, drug dealing, and money laundering in the 80s. They did a bunch of time. Another couple of great examples, but they did win Le Mans in 1979 with a Porsche 935, so they must be heroes of ours. And finally, we got a couple of real gentlemen, both champions, both multiple-time champions. We've got Prost and Schumacher. Now, they've been glorified as time goes on, but people who are of a certain age watched them race back in the day. They were known for getting their elbows out. There's a nice polite way of saying they crashed people to win the championship. This is when Prost crashed into Senna, so that he would lock in the championship at Suzuka. Intentionally, I don't care what anybody says, intentionally crashed into him because he knew if Senna didn't finish, that he would win the championship. Senna returned that favor later on in another year. But these are our heroes. These are our racing heroes right here.
And I think it's important to say, like any high-level competitive event, you know, you've got 100 people and they all have their sense of identity and their sense of status embedded in winning a thing. 99 people in that environment are not going to be happy with the outcome, and they're going to question how fair the outcome was, no matter how fair or not fair it is. I think it's important in any competitive endeavor. Are we keeping you up? I think it's important in any competitive endeavor to remember humans are humans. The idea that, oh yes, this must be fair, and there is an objective fairness out there, that is an illusion, that is a myth. Everybody's going to bring their own perspective to it. And to get really bent about fairness in motorsport is chasing a vastly diminishing return. There's just no such thing.
No, nobody's ever going to agree on what's fair. It is completely, it's subjective in that point, where anybody arguing about the rules, you watch any F1 race and something happens and they have to send it to the stewards, and everybody has a different opinion on what happened, like the final race between Hamilton when he almost won his last championship but didn't, and everybody was arguing for a year after that. What was fair about that? Fair is what sells. Fair is about the money, fair is about the image, fair is about what you see on the outside, not about what is actually fair for the racers.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think it's important nobody who loses is going to say that it's fair. That's just not human nature.
No.
So you kind of have to give that up. What do we want to do next here? Well, let's talk about organizers. So the whole point of a racing series is defining the ways in which you cannot go as fast as you might want to. It is, yes, sure, you're trying to go as fast as you can, but that is in this very defined area, using an exact kind of tire, nothing better, and a motor size of an exact limit, a fuel of a very exact type. As the organizer, it is all about putting limitations on it. And there's a pretty clear reason for that. The idea that we're here to take all the limitations off works great right up until things start to go wrong. People start to die and money starts to get overspent. And John raised the point of Can-Am as probably, that's one of your slides, right? Yeah, probably the apex of what was, other than Land Speed Record, what was a really unrestricted racing series in our lifetime, and what happened with it.
So Can-Am, is this still on? No? All right. So this one you gotta talk into like really close. I'm gonna shake or spit, that's great. Okay, so Can-Am existed from 1966 through 1973, 74 actually. And it was supposed to be this unlimited race series where all you had to have were 4 wheels, an enclosed body, had to have a windshield, even if it was only 1 inch high. But basically you could do whatever you want. Engine size, 2 seats. Had to be a sports car arrangement with 2 seats. Of course, the other seat could be, built for a small child, because it as long as it fulfilled to actually be a seat. But what was great about it was, because they took off all the reins of what about an engine or the car could be, these great innovators like Jim Hall, these are the chaparrals that were built over time, started building things that no one had ever seen before in racing. We had cars with wings on them, and the wing on the one on the upper left, that was attached directly to the suspension, so it wouldn't push down on the car, it pushed down on the arm, so it didn't actually, you could run really light springs on it. It was absolutely brilliant. Then the next car after that, number 7 there, that was an absolutely abysmal disaster of a car. But the idea was you could lay down flat inside of it when they didn't want the high wings. They were worried about those high wings breaking off and killing people. And they limited the high wings from a lot. They tried it in Formula One as well, but they got rid of them. So the low wing on that would go up and down depending on a pedal on your foot. And then 1970, the one at the bottom there was the famous sucker car. And that, to me, was the high point of Can-Am. That is no rules. What can you build a car? So that's got a giant Chevy engine in it, but it also has a snowmobile motor in there. And the fans on the back are cooling fans from a tank. And it sucked the car to the ground. So it didn't need a wind, it didn't need aerodynamics. It had the same downforce in a corner going 10 miles an hour as it did at 200 miles an hour. So it literally could drive around everything. Now, they came out in 1970, as we know, race cars, when they come out, their first years are usually problematic. It had its issues, but when it ran well, it was terrifying to everybody else. So what happened? Rules started being implied and controlled in Can-Am, and Can-Am started to go downhill. Here's a couple of the other great, ridiculous cars. One of these here. This is a Shadow, and this is a Shadow. I mean, that is basically a go-kart with a big block Chevy engine in the back. Those front wheels are only 12 inches. All right. See these air brakes? Those would pop up when you hit the brakes. They go flat when the car was driving. This Lola, Stewart was driving this. He said, well, I didn't have enough front downforce for him. So they took a wing off the back and they put it on the front. It's as big as you think it is. That is a huge wing stuck up the front of it. Whatever worked, whatever they thought would work, they did. It was exceptional. And of course, the end of the line was the 91730, which was the Porsche. And its predecessor, 91710. Now, I could give you a whole 45 minutes on that car, but that's the legendary car, probably the most powerful sports car ever built in qualifying trim, over 1,500 horsepower. And the car weighed under 2,000 pounds. It goes 0 to 200 miles an hour in 10 seconds. It could lay, this is Larkin Donahue would talk about it. What he wanted in a car was a car that could lay 2 black stripes from one corner to the next. He finally got it with that car. It was unstoppable. In fact, in 1973 when it won, it would lap second place at one of the races. Second place being the turbo Porsche from the previous year. So that's how far Can-Am went before it finally got shut down, before organizers like this took it apart. And you'll explain that.
Yeah, and the problem with that was, and Can-Am ran into this problem, eventually, and it doesn't take very long, you run out of lives. I mean, you start getting to a place where you're killing more people than the audience will actually tolerate, and you run out of money. And that happens pretty quickly once the reins really come off, and that's what happened to Can-Am. Can-Am was, for, 5 years, really the preeminent in North America racing series.
Absolutely. It was the highest purse in the world, which that way attracted people from, but back then, it doesn't exist now, unfortunately, but we all got to see it. Formula One drivers would show up and drive Can-Am cars. Trans Am drivers would drive Can-Am cars. Everybody would come from all over the world to get the purses that Johnson Wax was laying down.
Right. And the ish and what they ran into, that worked okay for a while. And what you run into is you start running into those limits. And when Johnson Wax looked back and said, well, gosh, there's one car that is dominant. The crowds aren't that interested in that. There's a certain number of people who are getting smoked and the crowds aren't that interested in that. We're not going to write the checks for the sponsorship money anymore. And that was the end of the series. It becomes self-limiting. And I think what people really don't appreciate about racing at the foundation of that is it's not about technology and it's not about driving. It is 90% about organization. It is about, do you have the right solution to a problem at a specific track? Do you know where the stuff that you need the moment you need it is? Do you have the right answer to your aerodynamic package? It is all of these unsexy organizational problems that wind up making the difference between winning and losing in racing, and that is very expensive. And to have the money that can drive that, you wind up with a Porsche and nobody else. That becomes an unsustainable model after a while. And so what the organizers are really trying to do, they are running a business. And when you look at racing, what you're looking at are businesses. And those organizers have to really think first and foremost, what is a sustainable business? And if they don't think that, their business doesn't last. Everything you're looking at is the result of a business decision. And the decision to end Can-Am, as spectacular as it was an unavoidable business decision based on the business model of, hey, let people do whatever they want, and that was unsustainable. So when you ask, well, gosh, what is racing and why am I seeing what I'm seeing? I think the very first question that you have to ask yourself is, well, what's the business model behind this? Because that's going to determine what are the rules, who are the drivers, what factories are in, what tire makers are in. It's all because it is a conscious business decision based on the organizer. And Can-Am shows what happens when they make the wrong decision.
And this was really also the advent of sponsorship in racing. So in the 50s, people were just racing for fun. It was I've gone through so many historic photographs, and some of my favorite are Pomona in the 50s. And it was just a field of like people's Volkswagen vans and station wagons pulling small trailers and their Austin Healey's or MGs, and they're all having picnics and having a great time. And it was a family-oriented kind of cool atmosphere. It was a lot of people were doing it for fun. Now, advertising came in the 60s when the expenses started getting so insane. You could not sell enough cars to pay for these cars that you're building on the racetrack anymore. And advertising came in and everything changed. And that's when it became a business model. And John Bishop at IMSA and the FIA and all those guys, they really started focusing on the money. Where's the money coming from? How does the money move? It's not about the participants anymore. It's now about the people receiving the visual of the advertising.
And I would put it a little differently. I would say that the model changed. And in the 50s, the model was, well, we're going to run SCCA or whatever it is, And the way that we're gonna make this thing self-supporting is that the people who wanna come and get on the track and drive a race car, they'll pay an entry fee, and that'll pay the bills. And the model was the ultimate customer, the race driver, was actually the one who was supporting the series. That started to change really in the 60s in a big way, and the model changed to, no, the support, the real revenue, that's coming from the spectators that the sponsors are paying us even more money to advertise to. The focus of the people doing the organizing went away from the drivers, the participants, who were actually in the cars turning the steering wheels, and it went to these other people, the spectators, who weren't really even the customer. The real customer was the Johnson Wax that wanted to advertise to those people. You're now 3 steps removed from the actual racers. That's what's driving the business. And I think that you see a fundamental and a profound change in what is the organizer's motivation at that point, and who are they really trying to satisfy? Is it the racers, and is it the hardcore observers of the racers, or is it somebody else who has probably a different agenda? And what you wind up with is this very different flavor of business, a very different flavor of racing between the early 50s and by the late 60s. That transition is almost complete in serious road racing, professional road racing.
And I remember when I got started racing in the 90s at SCCA, just as a kid with a BMW 2002, it was really hard. And I didn't understand how you got to professional level. I went to Skip Barber school, and I was trying to figure out how you did it, but it was about money. And I didn't come from a rich family. And I realized early on that I didn't have the hundreds of thousands of dollars it took to get from this series to that series to that series to become a great racer. And you made a comment, we were talking about this, on how the reason all this money came into it, all the advertising came into it, and it started stigmatizing losing. That losing was not acceptable because you couldn't lose because your advertiser would leave you. So as a participant, I didn't care about winning or losing essentially. I cared about the driving. I wanted to go out there, I wanted to pass some cars. If I won a trophy, it was awesome. But I didn't have to worry about losing my sponsor at the end of the day because something happened. And I think that change for me was what really kind of pushed me out of the racing world and the amount of money that it took.
And there's a more fundamental change that happens there. And I think about this a lot with Lemons, and that is that when you move away from it's about the participant and you move away to a business model that is driven by spectators and the sponsorship of spectators and the TV rights for spectators, you are fundamentally changing the nature of what you're trying to do, and you're creating an environment where the goal is to select and lionize an elite. It is no longer about everybody on the racetrack. It is about the struggle to be the one person who wins, and once you have done that, then the one person who wins more races, so you get to be a champion, and then the one person who gets to win more championships, and you get to be one of the guys we saw earlier who's crashing somebody else out, because that's the only way to win more championships. It becomes simply about the elite and everybody else. And that's great for some business models, and that has worked great for NASCAR, and it's worked great for F1, but for an actual racer who just wants to get out and race, not a great model. And I really think if you look at the Lion as the creation of an elite as the driving force of motorsport, and really all professional sports at this point, and you look at how different that is from where SCCA was in 1951, you start to understand that sense that people have of, oh gosh, it's not like it used to be.
One of the notes we have here was your breakdown of what racing is as far as percentages. So he says that racing is 90% organization, 8% driving, and 2% technology, right?
Yeah, I changed that ratio, which I made up in my head. I changed that depending on the audience, but yeah, 98-10, or 98-2, yeah.
I always thought, as a driver, I was like, no, the driving is 50% of it at least. I'm more than half. But the truth is, you're not. And especially if you run a team, I started doing Lemons, and I'd always done stuff by myself up to that point. But you really need a team for Lemons. And putting a team together, I realized it was about organization.
Or the lack of organization.
Or the vicious lack of organization.
Yeah.
So does that lead us into the non-elite?
Yeah, I think it does, but one other piece, I just want to go back and I want to say the idea of nominating an elite, struggling to join an elite, if you are a highly competitive person, and God knows there's a lot of them, that is great, and it's great that that exists for people who that is their makeup and they want to be in that environment. The reality is that's maybe 1% of the public. And 99% of the public is quite clear. I'm one of them. I think John is one of them. Most of us are probably in this other group. 99% of the public understands we're just not going to be that guy. And if your dream, if you grow up dreaming about getting on track because you love cars, but you understand in your soul you're really not that guy, you're one of the 99%, that has been historically a pretty big break on getting in a race car. Vintage, I was having lunch with John and Gary, and Vintage really provided a good outlet for that, because in vintage racing you often can hold up your hand and say, hey, I'm in a Formula V, of course I lost. So you can buy your way around that a little bit. But it is important to remember that any endeavor where it is about nominating a tiny little elite, and if you're not in the elite you have failed, that's going to dissuade a lot of people from trying it at all. That, I think, segues
into the non-elite.
We have a representative.
Yes, we have someone. Do you have your pants somewhere? Can we get those pants up? So bringing in the non-elite. Now this is mostly Jay, right? So like, this is your world, and I thank you for creating it, because it loosened up racing so much for so many people, where they didn't like. I'm talking from a racer's perspective, right? I was in New York and I was reading about these maniacs in 2007 going around Altamont in $500 cars with just like no roll bars and regular seat belts and maybe a fire extinguisher. Like, that's all you had back then, right? It was complete mayhem. It was more of a smash-up derby, and they were racing for 24 hours in these cars. And I'm thinking, now I want to do that. Like, that sounds like fun. The days of like going out and doing a 20-minute session, and maybe another 20-minute session, and if you won the race, you got another 20-minute session. Ho-hum, right? But smashing around in a car that I don't care about, I was like, oh, I need to be part of this when I get back to California. And I did.
Well, and I should say we very, very quickly learned that's not what we wanted to do.
But that was your first shot.
That was our first shot. And so this first race, it was supposed to only be one race. For me and a dozen of my buddies, yeah, we didn't know what we were doing, and we just wanted to take cheap, crappy cars and go bash them around. Very quickly, within the first half of a lap, it became evident that was a big mistake. And what you really want is you want to be able to offer something fun and low pressure like that, but you don't want to kill anybody. And it's pretty important. As soon as you have that, which I should have thought of earlier, as soon as you have that realization, you start to realize how important safety and prep and tech inspection is not less important with amateurs and crappy cars. It is more important. So very quickly we realized that first race was a bad idea, tried to do it differently. However, what I think the big point without realizing any of this was by having crappy cars and people dressed in funny outfits, what you did was you removed it from being a struggle to join the elite, and you removed it from being lionization of the elite. And you made it something that people were not afraid to lose at, or to go and say, I'm just going to bring a crappy car, and whatever happens to it, I don't care. It's not my $400,000 car. I don't have a sponsorship on the line. I'm just going to go have fun.
Yeah, so if you're bringing in an Edsel to a race, I don't think you have any great expectations of being a dominant force out on the racetrack. And there's all kinds of fantastic cars that would show up. It not only opened up the teams and the drivers, but it opened up cars I had never seen on a racetrack before. So not only the elite humans, but the elite vehicles were put aside as well. It was welcoming to all levels. And yeah, and I'm glad it got safer. That was nice. Like, nowadays, that's your greatest expense, really, are on the cars. Just so people don't know a lot about Lemons, I think we assume the original idea most people have in their minds was they were $500 cars. If you lost the race, they crushed it afterwards, and that was, you know, and people were maniacs and didn't care. It's evolved immensely since then, and the $500 car idea is still there, but your first car is going to cost you about $5,000 in a roll cage and a fire suppression system and things like that, and you still have a crappy car. So I'll talk about my car at the end of this and how it progressed from being a $500 car to probably a $50,000 car at this point. But the atmosphere was like, here's a Lincoln Continental. I got to race this last December. The car weighs almost 5,000 pounds. It's covered in fur. When it rains, it weighs another 200 pounds as the fur absorbs the water. Has a horse on the roof, and it neighs as it drives around the track. I've driven incredibly sophisticated race cars. I've driven really fast stuff. I can't tell you how much fun it is driving at 460 V8 with 200 horsepower and 5,000 pounds around a racetrack as fast as you possibly can, and getting past a lot. But when you get to pass somebody in that, you feel real victory. Like, you need to pass one car to feel like a hero in that.
And I'm gonna let John, I stopped driving in Lemons 15 years ago, and John has a lot more recent experience than I do. So I'll let him talk more about his own cars in a sec to finish us off. But I do want to say, Lemons, we didn't plan any of this. It evolved very quickly. As Gary said, in terms of asses in the seats, it is the biggest racing series in the world now. And I think the reason is pretty simple, because there is actually fun stuff to do. Figuring out how to make a car run is fun. Hanging out with your car friend buddies in the garage, building up to a race is fun. Getting on the track and actually driving whatever you're driving, those things are all fun. And when it's not your personal sense of self-worth, because if you're not the one guy who wins in a 100-car race, you're a loser, that really changes the complexion of it. I hope we have gotten a lot more serious about guys can show up and can bring crazy cars, but hopefully they're not going to die for their pleasure. I think we've gotten a lot more serious about that. And I think that helps people be a little more comfortable with it as well. There's no real way to know this. It seems from the best research we can do that in the United States, in the road racing world, we've effectively doubled the number of people in this country who can say, I've been in a road race, I've done the thing, and I've gotten in a racing car, and I've had a real wheel-to-wheel road racing experience. I'm pretty proud of that. I mean, I think that was something that had to happen. So, John, you've been running cars, so take it away.
Yeah, and I want to just add to that. It is adding the population of racers, people who have had experience in a race car, then leads to other race cars. It leads to vintage racing. You know, that's my next step, is I want to get a vintage race car. And I know a lot of people are like, they get in, they're like, they catch the bug, and they might go and join NASA or SCCA and be like, I want to race something open wheel or more serious. It's about that level of entry now. It's so low, but you set the bar so low that anybody can get into racing. Gee, you can basically, all you need is a driver's license, a regular driver's license, and you can get on a team. They have these boards now where you can go like, I'd like to drive your car for one session at this race. How much? You arrive and drive for a few $100, and you're a race car driver. Which, I mean, that's the dream of so many kids. I mean, I want to be a race car driver. So I've now been doing Lemons for about a decade. We'll get to my car. And I just want to talk you through my experience of it. But here's a couple of cars. There's the Swedish bobsled team, the USS Enterprise, these guys. You know, where else are you going to see two Vanagons running against each other door to door, right? There's just, look at that combination, right? And any question if a checker cab can beat a Honda Civic, like those kind of conversations. But this is my first Lemons car, and you had to have a theme, so that was one of the things. But originally, the themes have come back, but they went away for a little bit. We didn't understand how Lemons worked, so we changed the theme every race because we were worried we wouldn't be accepted. We had to write a letter when you first started. So our first team was Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Those are phalluses as camouflage on that car. This is a zombie car we built with dead body parts on it. This is a 1987 Toyota Supra with a stock engine, not a turbo. Very heavy car. This is the car from Cars, the movie, one of the drift cars. And we changed the name. We finally realized we could do one theme, as we came up with, because it's a Supra, the Sopranos. So that's the Sopranos. We actually got the grill from Tony Soprano's Cadillac Escalade and put it on the front of the car. Now this car started off legitimately as a $500 car. We found it, we gutted it, we built a cage for it, and we started racing it, and we blew it up. Then we raced it again, and we blew it up, and we realized it was a dreadful race car. Like, a lot of the cars that race you think are going to be fantastic race cars are horrible, and some of the ones that are horrible, you think are going to be horrible race cars, like an Alfa, are actually great race cars and super reliable on a racetrack. It's a great experiment. So they hated this car. The reason for that is after we blew the engine up, we got an engine out of a Japanese market Toyota, a 1JZ twin turbo, and we dropped it in this. And Judge Phil, who was the main judge for a long time, came over to us, and we were moving up the ranks. And you get racing, you start getting obsessed with winning, right? You're like, you start putting more and more effort into, like, we're getting closer. We came in 8th place out of 150 cars. Phil comes over and goes, real simply says, you can come in 1st place, but I will never give you a trophy. This car will never win because it's a cheaty, horrible car. It's against the idea of lemons. You put a big turbo motor in a car that it actually came in. He goes, this is boring, dull, and I hate it. He goes, I'll give you a choice. He goes, you can either put a straight 6 out of a Ford pickup truck in that, or you can take that engine and put it in a pre-1975 Toyota, which he knew would be impossible. Or was it? So we found a 1970 Toyota Corona. And we found it in this, one family owned it from new in Stockton, California. We found it, we put some new tires on it, and we literally drove it with a roll cage, dead stock, 2-speed transmission, 90 horsepower, 4-wheel drum brakes. You can see I was leaning over. It was absolutely probably my favorite race I've ever done in Lemons. And it was Judge Phil's explanation of why he took all the winning out of it. That was never going to win anything. So we just drove it for fun. There was no expectation in any corner to get to win the corner. There was no expectation of anything. It was just to get around the track for 2 days straight, which we did. And I was giggling the whole time because you drove it with the rearview mirror. You're just driving it like this with a giant steering wheel, and you just watch the cars going by like this. You just stay to the right, and wind's blowing by as they blow by, and you're like, this is great, I love it. Because there were us trying to get to the front with the Supra, all of that was washed away. All the anxiety was washed away. And we got to be the ultra non-elite. We were just these guys in this crappy car going around a racetrack laughing all the way. Now, as a racer, you can't let that be. So it started to change, and we took the front and rear subframes out of the Supra, welded them onto this 1970 Toyota Corona, put the 1JZ in it, and it started transforming into this. So this now has the front brakes off of a Mustang. It's got 1JZ, 2.5 liter twin turbo. It's probably cost, so every race we make a spreadsheet of what costs we have for that race. And intentionally for years, I kept the spreadsheets separate. Because I was like, one day I'm gonna put all the spreadsheets on one spreadsheet and see what this car has cost me over the past decade. What a mistake. That is a piece of crap car. It is dreadful. It is noisy. It doesn't do anything terribly well except make a lot of great noise. And it has cost me over $50,000. Totally worth it. 100% worth it. And It's been fallow for a couple of years right now. We're bringing out a retirement. Hopefully, it's going to be racing again in May. But you guys can come up and check it out. We've done some modifications. The radiator now is in the back seat, rally style. Hence the big scoops coming out the back window. So it's got that. The exhaust is coming out the side door now because I always dug the 1988 Audi Trans Am cars, the flames coming out. So we reprogrammed it so when you come off the gas, it blows 4-foot flame on anybody next to you. It's totally safe. And it's now running on 85 because that's responsible race fuel. It's also cheap because 85 has massive octane. It's only $3 a gallon instead of 100 octane fuel being $10 a gallon. So it's the only reason we switched is because it's cheaper to drive it. But that is my fabulous race car. And it's the great thing is it's my race car. That's something I built from scratch, and me and my team have a blast doing. We have no expectations. All we are is having fun. We never expect to win a trophy with this thing. We just go out there and we do the thing that we all want to do. We just race and have fun. And I think that's what Lemons has given us as a present to the entire automotive world. I'm not blowing the smoke up your ass, but it's just like it's true. Lemons has given us something that this sport desperately needed: a low level of entry, a high level of fun. And there you go.
Thanks.
I guess we can take if you have some questions about our crazy theories, that'd be great.
Has this made a transformation to Europe?
So no.
Well, the question is, has this made it as transferred to Europe?
So it turns out that the IP holder of the 24 Hours of Le Mans is not super amused by any of this. And in the United States, you have a lot of protection under parity defense and other defenses, so there's not much they can do about this. When we expanded to Australia and New Zealand, we started going back and forth with them. We wound up doing an arrangement with the ACO that New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and the United States, we can do whatever we want. If we want to do anything anywhere else that they operate, they need to be involved in it. I haven't felt like flying to Paris and working that out with them, so yeah, no, it's just those 4 places.
Yes.
How long is the race, start to finish?
So it's 2 days. It's a Saturday and Sunday, Friday test day, and it's 2 8-hour days.
Okay.
So it's not 24 hours anymore. Or they do have a 24-hour race still in Colorado, I think.
Yeah, we do every season. So we do about 24 races around the United States every year. Every season we do at least one full 24-hour. The last couple of years that has been in High Plains in Denver. Outside of Denver, we're actually adding a second 24-hour race, which you will hear about at Sonoma later, but in any case, so usually it's 16.5 hours is a typical weekend.
And the nice thing about that, getting back to the Pomona idea, is that the Saturday night, everybody gets together, there's a potluck, a feast, and you're talking about, there's 150 cars, there's 150 teams, there's 1,000 people out there helping each other. Everybody's pitching in, tearing motors apart. I've seen whole cars rebuilt overnight and be done 5 minutes before the race started the next morning because the community came together to make it happen. It's a really cool event. Yes?
Is Concourse of Lemons also involved with the group that's the racing and the concourse?
Yeah, it's so Alan Galbraith runs the Concourse of Lemons. He and I started that together. Well, it was his idea, and he came to me and said, "Hey, I want to do a really crappy concourse show like your crappy race." He was a racer; we've been friends forever. And I said, "Well, that's great, Alan, but I don't want to do that." And he said, "But I want to use your name. I want to call it the Concourse of Lemons." I said, "Oh, all right, I guess I better be involved in it." So we set that up together. I was involved with that for the first couple of years, and I realized this is a terrible idea. I don't want to do this. This is no fun at all. And I said, "Well, I want to keep doing it. Can I just keep using your name?" I said, "Sure." So it's as loosely affiliated as you can get. But I usually show up and judge at the concourse, and he shows up and judges at a bunch of races, and I don't know, that's high business right there.
Is the Monterey event the only event?
No, I think he's doing 4 Concours I know of in 25. He's talked about as many as 6. I'm not sure if he's going to get the sites for the other ones, but you'd have to ask Alan.
Yeah, so there's one at Amelia Island, upcoming in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Yes?
I'm confused about the aero packages. You spent a lot of time talking about the Can-Am aero packages and the technology involved. You showed a bunch of Lemons cars that have this also complicated superstructure aero packages, and then your car has nothing. What gives?
So, one of the things we did that Lemons overlooks in their tech is if you are a car historian, a race car historian, you can, all the cheaty stuff that was made illegal back in the 70s, like weight jacking and things like that, you can totally do with Lemons. So we actually have weight jacking in this car. The front air dam is actually made out of license plates. There's a rear wing on the back that's made out of license plates. What we are building for this car right now, that hopefully will be done in May, is I have the wing off a 1971 McLaren Can-Am car. And we're gonna put it on the roof of that. So it's like they did on the Porsche in the 50s, that center wing, right? So I don't have to worry about balancing the car front and rear. I'm just gonna put the wing in the center. We're gonna put it on hydraulics and then a pneumatic ram, so when you hit the brakes, it'll come up like a giant air brake, and then slam flat when you hit the gas. So that's our next advancement for this car. There were actually a couple of teams. One team a few years ago had a Cessna wing on top of their car. They were the Our Lady of Blessed Downforce, Perpetual Downforce, yeah. And there's been other people with true aerodynamic packages. This guy built a race car out of was it a Huey helicopter? What is that helicopter he built it out of?
Yeah.
So a Huey helicopter and a Cessna airplane on top of a Toyota Sienna. Polished out with the tail in it, no wings on it obviously, but it's a Cessna that drives, and he raced that. So you can do whatever you want with the aerodynamics. We're going to play with that. It's just a matter of time and money, really. But yeah, we'll hopefully have that. The funny thing is that wing probably costs as much as what the car costs. But that's going to be the joke.
And I want to add, because that brings up a really interesting point. And one of the things, I don't come from a racing background at all, so I kind of picked this up over time. People who watch a lot of racing, they think like, I need a big turbo, that is how I'm going to win. Or, I need an aero package, that was the dominant thing in Can-Am, and that is why those cars are fast. The reality is, when you are seeing professional racing and you're seeing a race in which a pound of boost makes the difference between winning and not winning, that is because those teams that have made it to that level, they have solved the organizational problems, and they have solved the driving problems. And all that's left is that fractional, infinitesimal little bit that is going to be the difference between first and second. That's not the rest of us. And so guys like this, and even John is downplaying it. I mean, he's got a lot of experience, a lot of racing background, and a lot of knowledge. Even guys like that, until all of your organizational problems are solved and most of your driving problems are solved, well, wing ain't gonna help. It's just not gonna matter.
Yeah, and I'm by far the fastest driver on my team. I got 3 guys who are amateur drivers, and so they're never gonna have the lap times I'm gonna have. We are not organized as far as the way the other teams can fuel as quickly, because multiple fuel stops for these over the hours, as you can imagine. The organized teams are the ones that win. And some of the cars, there's a BMW 5 Series, an older one, that wins all the time. Has no arrow on it at all. In fact, it's all been torn off the car. It's the slipperiest version of it. And they go out there and they do, the lead drivers known have done 6-hour stints in it. And that's how they win. So the equation for endurance racing is a little different than sprint racing, which is what Can-Am was, with 90-minute races. But endurance racing really is about getting out there, staying out there as long as you can, which organization and planning keep you out on the track.
I remember when Lemon started, but I can't remember what year that was.
2006, October 2006.
Now it's an institution.
Yeah. They're institutionalized, one or the other, yeah.
Yes?
There's a car out in the parking lot of South Street. I sort of learned that maybe you have, that's one of your cars.
It is, and the fabricator is right here, but he's declining perhaps to speak Would someone from the organization like to speak to that car?
Okay, so,
We can't hear you otherwise.
okay. Thank you. Go to the microphone. Thank you both. Okay, so I found that car in Arizona during COVID with a. What is it? It's a 41 Ford. And got it out of it was at a ranch. It was rusting. It had thousands of pounds of steel sitting in it, and I decided to bring it home. I had no idea what I was going to do with it. Sitting in my yard under a tarp, some friends who are have been racing with you guys for a while invite me to watch a race at Sonoma, and I'm sitting there going, "Holy crap! I now know what I need." We spent the next year and a half building it, and I've done 3 races, put together a great team. 2 of us are completely green and stuck. The other 2 are really fast. So car can do so much more than I can. It's been great, but I would never have ended up on track had it not been for Lemons. So it's been an amazing. I highly recommend it. I'm 60, first time on the track last year. Did a whole bunch of track days, and the elite attitude that shows up at a beginning level NASA event with a car like that was just kind of heartbreaking. It was like, I just want to learn how to drive. I don't need a bunch of attitude because I didn't show up with a BMW whatever or a $360,000 Porsche. So doing the track days was great training. Get on the track with Lemons was like, holy shit! Now I'm really sorry. now I really got to learn. But it's been great. And yeah, that car's been fun, and it's been great showing up somewhere where the group at Lemons gets that car.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Any other questions?
When's the next race?
March, Sonoma.
22nd, 23rd.
22nd and 23rd this month at Sonoma. And if you have never been to one, just go to one of the days. I recommend going Saturday because about half the cars don't make it to Sunday. So Saturday morning is definitely your best bet to watch the car that's covered in fur or has a giant something on the roof.
I showed up at 10 o'clock on a Saturday, and I was going to be there for 2 hours, and I ended up being there until checker flag. I highly recommend get to a Lemons race at 1:30, 2 o'clock. Plan on being there all the way through the checker flag.
Yeah, so he recommends getting there around 1 or 2 and then staying till the checkered flag.
The checker flag is amazing.
It is, and the cheer at the end of the checkered flag isn't for one car because you can't tell out of 150 cars which one's in the lead anyway. You're cheering all these cars because they made it across the finish line. And the worse the car, the bigger the cheers are. It's always wonderful. Yes.
I recommend you talk about black flags.
Black flags? Is that specific to your team? What about black flags? You're the organizer. You're the one throwing them. I've never gotten a black flag.
So we touched on this briefly when we did this, when I put this together for this one time in October 2006, having no idea how any of this worked. And the guy who was the rental manager at Altamont where we did it just said, oh, it's fine, just, two-part roll cage is fine. You're not going to go very fast. Nobody needs fire suits. And I thought he knew what he was talking about. I believed him. And very quickly it was obvious that was not true. He didn't know what he was talking about. Those things were all very necessary for something like this. So black flags are really part of the safety systems. And I will say, statistically, you look at miles or hours driven by a guy wheel to wheel, we have the best safety record in the business in terms of hours, people competing, and I mean, knock on wood, fortune has a lot to do with this, but we have not had a serious incident, and we've put more race miles than any other racing series out there. A lot of that is just good luck, but a lot of that is also that unlike a lot of other series, we have zero tolerance for screwing around. If you put a wheel off, you're going to get penalized for that. You're going to get talked to for that. If you get out of control, you're going to get penalized. You're going to get talked to for that. And the issue is, and I think most racing series, they don't really want to confront this, 4,999 times out of 5,000, you do something stupid, you go off track, it's a complete non-event. Nothing happens. You get back on track, you have grass on your tires. And in most racing, well, that's just racing. Like, he was going for it, and that's just racing. But one time in 5,000, there is a corner worker picking up a part where that car goes off track. Or there's another car that is already stalled out there, and it is a big problem. And if you don't stop those innocuous behaviors that are probably not going to result in an injury, if you don't stop those right then and reduce the total number, everybody feels, well, I'm not going to be the 1 in 5,000 guy. The chances that I'm going to be the 1 in 5,000 guy that has a bad outcome are really slim, and they're right about that. But collectively, if you have 500 a weekend, in 10 weekends, you're going to have a bad outcome. So you really got to knock that down. So for us, the black flags are simply, this is a behavior that is probably innocuous right now, but if unchecked and multiplied by driver after race after race, we're going to have a problem. So that's leaving the racing service, that's being out of control, that's missing a flag, that's having contact with another vehicle, that's having contact with a barrier, having contact with a cone, anything like that. We want to bring you in, we want to talk to you, we will possibly make you do something embarrassing as a little memento so you don't want to do it again. But the main objective is that is part of the safety system of a race. The conceit that, hey, that's just racing and rubbing is racing and all that, I just don't buy that. I think that's dangerous and unnecessary. You've been eager.
Yeah, the reason is I want to stay with what you're doing. While you all were talking, I realized that you had left out this aspect, and you just touched on it right here, which was something embarrassing. What I was told by a friend who participated a number of years ago, that they were doing something wrong, and you guys welded a fin on top of the car. So could you go into the ways that you all do that? What you do and why you do it?
So very quickly, generally your first mistake, you'll come in and we'll just say, hey, look, this is what happened. We'll try to judge. If you're a racer and you want to fight about it, you'll be in there a lot longer than if you simply accept, like, you know what, that's right, I shouldn't have done that, fine. If it's a repeating problem the second or the third time, we will start doing things that are time-consuming and embarrassing, such as welding a giant metal chicken to your roof, or stapling safety cones to your doors, just to sort of make our point that you can't keep doing that over and over. And actually, our standing rule is you get 4 bites at the apple, and after that, you're out. If you can't be cured, you got to go somewhere else.
Yeah, so you'll be pulled off the race for the day if you do 5.
Yeah.
But you'll commonly see guys saran wrapped to the roof of their cars with megaphones, driving through the paddock, having to say something that, like, are we not men? We are Devo, and then we'll just go through. That's common. You got 150 cars on the track, and most of these guys are amateur drivers who just have regular driver's licenses. They're getting an education at every lap. They're also getting an education with every black flag. And the judges have a very difficult job there of educating these people in a very. You come in, you've been on the track. You come in, your heart rate's up, right? You're all fired up, and you got this guy in a black outfit and a white wig because they dress up like judges, and they're like, you know what you did wrong. Immediately, people are like, I didn't do anything wrong. I was doing everything fine. They're like, settle down, and they will teach you what the correct thing to do. If you don't learn, then you're taken out. And I think that's been a great deal of the safety from it, has been that the education of these drivers by positive reinforcement and sometimes really cruel negative reinforcement. Yeah.
I just wanted to add the point, which I love, is in the rules and just the attitude that all the judges kind of put forth is that it's everybody's fault. Because cars have contact. Yeah, there might be more liability, but
Yeah, so he's saying that the judges always say it's everybody's fault. So if there's 2 cars and they collide, you're both at fault. They don't care who hit who. That's not the argument. You're both involved, you both touched. It could be one guy clown, and that's when the arguments start. Well, he hit me, and it's like, doesn't matter. It's a level playing field. You both get in. You have a little talking to. Don't make this happen again. Keep your eyes open. You have to have the situational awareness. Again, there's 150 cars on the track. And when you got a fast car like that one, I can pass 3 or 4 cars per corner, which makes a lot of fun, but it also could be a little bit dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Yeah. Yes?
Do you limit the number of cars in an event?
What, do you limit the amount of cars at the event? I'm going to say no, because Lemons has the world record of the most race cars on track. And what was that?
200, well, there were 243 cars in the race at Thunder Hill in the 5 mile.
One time?
And 214 started. That is a Guinness World Record for road racing. But the short answer is yeah, there are limits. There's certainly limits to the size of the paddock. That's more common than the size of the track. But there are, Sonoma, we have a limit that we have bumped up against just in terms of how many cars you can fit on the track. New Hampshire, we have to cut at 120. You just can't get more cars on the track. SCCA has this old rule about X cars per mile and blah, blah, blah. There's really no statistical basis to a lot of those rules. We have just found from experience, you do get to a place where it's just too many. Interestingly, what happens is you don't lose, it actually gets safer in terms of serious physical kinds of risk. It actually gets safer the more cars you get, because you just can't, you can't really get up a good head of steam. Where you get really catastrophic injuries, these VMAX kind of crashes, or where you can, is where a guy can go flat out and there's a tree that's 50 yards off track, but he's going so fast that he can VMAX from full speed to the tree. If you've got 120 cars on a tiny little track, nobody's really going to go that fast. It's just no fun. There's no flow. And you get to a place, a lot of density on the track is really fun. You get a lot of traffic and it's a lot of experience, and you're taking in all this information. You get to a point where stuff is backing up. So we do limit races. We've tried to always stay a little bit ahead and add more races in the regions where the races fill up. You just add another race.
Have you got any statistics on how many drivers return and do multiple events?
Funny you asked that. We were actually just looking at this morning,
So the
just looking at the latest.
We got to, not everybody can hear what the question is on the statistics of how many racers return to the events, right?
It's about, in any given field, it's about 85 to 90%. The regions are a little different. 85 to 90% are veterans, returnees. The lifespan of, well, that's the wrong term. The number of races that people will attend, about 1/3 will do one, and that's it. And I think that's pretty predictable. For a lot of people, it's like jumping out of an airplane. You want to be able to say for the rest of your life, I did this thing. You don't really want to do it. I mean, you want to be able to say that you did it. 2/3 will come back, and once a driver has come back the second time, you get out to a mean that's 4 point something races over. I mean, we only have data going back to 2012, so those previous races aren't in that data, but it's 4+ something is the mean.
And I have a friend of mine who wanted to be all fired up about being a race car driver, and he worked with me at Canada, and I'm like, you should just do a Lemons race, do an arrive and drive. And he's all like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a race car driver. He bought the helmet and the suit and all this stuff, and he looked great. And I'm like, go arrive and drive like a Volvo. There's 3 classes. There's A, B, and C class you're separated into. A class being something like that, really fast. C class being like a stock minivan or something with a chicken on it. So I told him, get a C class car, go out there. He did 1 session, he did an hour. He came back and he's all, nope. And that was it. And then he just took his stuff off. He gave me the box of his clothes. Like, you sell that, I'm never doing that again in my life. But it's better to find out that way than to build yourself a race car and start from scratch and go do something. He learned real quick. He's like, oh, okay, that's not what I want to do. And it put nobody else at risk. He just went go around the track slow. He's like, yeah, that's not my scene.
I'm just kind of trying to anticipate what people might be interested in. Can you explain how you class A, B, and C?
So how are you class A, B, and C? That's the judges, and
our expression is we pull the classes out of our asses. There's
That's accurate.
Yeah, you get, I mean, we roughly call it chance of winning, no chance of winning, no chance of finishing. That's A, B, and C. It is not an exact science. And the glory of racing where you don't really care who wins is, maybe you get it wrong. Who cares? It's not a big deal.
Yeah, and if you win a class, so you win B class, you are automatically moved to A class. So you can never go back. So at least the winners are docked that we know that happens time to time.
Unless you're in an old Ford.
Yeah, unless you're in an old Ford. But if you show up with something insane, they will dock you. They also will give you penalty laps if you show up with something that's super cheaty. A couple of my favorites were these guys showed up with a Pontiac GTO, that like the 6-liter new GTO, and they also showed up with an RX-8 that they claimed was wrecked the Fukushima disaster, and they covered it with like nets. But they were both like full-blown, fast, real cars. So I forget who was judging the day. That like, would you mind? You have a tech sheet you have to hand in. Like, can you write the VIN number on the tech sheet? And they're like, oh, absolutely. They write the VIN number on the tech sheet, and the judge crosses out all the letters, and he goes, "There's your penalty laps." And there's like 1 billion penalty laps. And it takes, but then immediately takes all the pressure off the guys who are here to win their first time with the super fast car. Now it's all wiped away.
So I asked Gary, the Basques are going to lose their patience with us if we stay too much longer. So I think we need to wrap up. But we'll hang out, I guess, in the parking lot. And if anybody wants to ask anything else, we can do it out there. So thank you for being here.